we're not in a war of liberal versus conservative. We're not in any of those wars. We're in a spiritual war. We really are. And it's the war of the spirit of mankind, and it's a loss of some of the fundamentals. And you've already mentioned some of them, and we can certainly talk to them. But what
Mm-hmm.
Bersabeh and I, our company that we jointly have is Harmonic Wealth Global, and our three fundamental principles that we are committed to with the people we're blessed to work with is consciousness, communication, and culture. And I'll just break those down real quickly. If
Yeah.
you look throughout history, Kim, every great shift throughout history, whether it was equal rights, whatever you want to plug in, came from a shift in consciousness. And we definitely need a shift of consciousness. And one of the things that has shifted in our consciousness is we have come from what I talk about in my book, God, Money, and Sex. And it's obviously a metaphor that I call it a vertical principle and a horizontal principle. And this vertical principle is a connectivity to a creator, to a prime being, and we'll call that God. And we've become disconnected from that all the way back to the humanistic movement, where we started to put ourselves in the place of God. And we can talk about a whole lot of examples as to how we're doing that in today's world. And then it's God, money, and sex. And so the third one of consciousness is money. We have unfortunately become a culture that worships money and materialism.
Mm-hmm.
We have knelt at the altar of money and materialism for so long that there are people doing horrific things for money. And that's
Yeah.
that's been exposed and exposed and exposed. And so consequently it's brought us to this precipice of where we are, of chasing money to the expense of virtues. And so then finally is sex, and sex has been so misused, misunderstood, and bastardized in today's world. It's become an animalistic pleasure. And, we could talk about the human trafficking. We could talk about the pedophilia. We could talk about all the bastardizations of this sacred act. And I say that
Mm-hmm.
SEX is an acronym for Sacred Energy Exchange. And it's meant for individuals in a committed relationship to literally have an experience of God. It's meant for two reasons. Number one, it's meant to reproduce. And there's a lot of powers in this world right now that don't want us reproducing. And that's why there's all this gender dysphoria and so many different things that are going on that we can talk
Mm-hmm.
about. And its second thing is to, when it's used correctly, it's a sacred act, and it's used to experience a higher level of consciousness, a higher awareness, called that God. And I think, in a nutshell, we can break those down, but it's a consciousness, communication. Oh, I missed communication. Communication is, once we have a shift in consciousness, we have to be able to communicate that clearly. And one of the primary ways of communicating is to tell the truth. Now, truth is not valued in today's world, and we can see
No.
that time and again. In my history, there was multiple counts of perjury which were never prosecuted. We see people testifying in front of Congress and found out to be lying, never
Mm-hmm.
prosecuted. And so, consequently, the younger generations look around and go, "Okay, I guess it's okay to lie." Well, it's not okay to lie. And truth telling is not highly valued. Those who are telling the truth in today's world are either persecuted and sometimes prosecuted. And then
Mm-hmm.
culture is the collective values, beliefs, assumptions, expectations, let's call it, of our family, of our country, of our world. And so those are the three fundamentals that have to shift: consciousness, communication, and community.
Okay. So you think that what society has lost is there is a proper and healthy perspective on things like God. When you say God, what do you mean? Do you mean like we should all convert to a certain church and worship a certain God? It doesn't sound like that's what you're saying. So can you clarify
Yes.
what is that?
All human beings, and this is psychologically proven, need a hierarchy.
Mm.
Even if you look at animals, which are not human beings, obviously, but they have a hierarchy. There's always a
I don't
leader.
know. I feel like my dog is a person, but
Well, we're with you on that. We have a pretty enlightened dog, but nonetheless, and I'm being a little facetious, but nonetheless, we need a hierarchy. And so
Mm.
consequently, when we disconnected back in the humanistic movement from God, a fundamental principle, a creative principle, then the only hierarchy we have to find in what I call the secular world. And the way we do that is we look around us, we look at leaders. Well, who do we look to
Yeah.
for leadership? We look to celebrities, we look to sports heroes, we look to performers, some of us look towards government, not as many
Yeah.
these days, but we don't have someone to look to tell us what is virtuous and valuable and principled and moral.
Yeah. We have a desire as humans to worship is what you're saying.
We
And
do.
we naturally want to worship, and then we just worship it, but if we don't have it pointed in the right direction, then we end up worshiping unhealthy things like maybe a celebrity or ourselves, right? You know, we
So
start to worship these really unhealthy. Yeah, so the and I think we saw, that's kind of like what they would say, well, what I said, not they, I say, and others, I'm sure many others, during the pandemic in particular, right? We watched people worship the science, right? They said the science. And even when when the actual science was showing something completely different, it was like a religion. It had turned into a religion for people where they just couldn't, they no, this is what it is, and you can't show me anything otherwise. This is it, right?
Right.
So it's that latching on to a belief, and I think what has seemingly happened is a lot of people have, and I don't know the answer, and maybe one of you has the answer to this, but I don't know where should we point our worship that would be healthy. I think, I used to be a highly religious person, very religious. I've read the Bible like 11 times. I graduated from 4 years of seminary where I studied an hour a day of religion. Um, very big into religion and church, but I was a Mormon. So, and I think, but I grew up Catholic, converted to more. So but I grew up Catholic and Buddhist is a long story. But then I converted on my own to Mormonism, and then now I'm not religious at all. But when I look at religion, I can see I left religion because I no longer found it healthy. So I think, there's this, we see right now, even with wars that are being waged, oftentimes it's religiously based,
That's right.
no matter and
God
people
told
are
me to do this.
hating on each other. Yeah, there's this, and we've seen it just throughout history, the Crusades, or there's all of these different things that people do in the name of God, in the name of religion. All the religions have done it. There's no exclusionary of like this one's worse than the other in my mind. When I look at all of them, I see they've all practically done this in the name of religion. Um, and so religion can also take a really evil turn, when you worship religion. So there's that where, and I grew up in really conservative Idaho, which is extremely religious, and there was a lot of laws that were made on the basis of God and religion that I didn't think were actually healthy laws. But it didn't matter, and people that were ostracized and family members that were cast aside and treated like garbage because they, just things that I thought were really truly antithetical to what the religion was teaching. So religion can go in a direction that I think brings people to a point where they are not living a healthy, moral, ethical life. But then without it, we also see what happens where people then start to worship Instagram and celebrities and money, and they start to worship themselves or the science, right, or whatever it is. And now we've got people demanding that we, deny actual science, like when it comes to biology. Um, so what is the, where's the, what do we, how do we, it seems like it's, you could go to one extreme or the other, right?
Right. I totally agree.
I
Bersabeh, you
can
wanna you
totally
wanna
see
weigh
that.
in?
I would say, if we were to look at all those things that you mentioned is spot on. And I think you have to go back to the root cause of all of this that leads each of us to do such things. And that is that this system has programmed and conditioned us to follow authority and to look for the so-called experts instead of trusting ourselves. And this has been going on for a very long time. So for us to be able to take, and that's what we do with, the people that we work with, is we teach them to become independent thinkers. So you
Mhm.
take the power back in your own hands. So you become the church. You don't go to a facility to worship God. No, you do it inside yourself. And we all have this innate ability, which you call intuition, and
Mhm.
we have to learn to trust ourselves more. And one of the things, because of the background that I have, I learned early on that you cannot put your trust in authority. They're not for you. The government is not your friend. The
Mhm.
so-called experts are not looking after your best interest at heart.
Neither
We
are
have
the religious authorities aren't either.
Mhm.
Exactly,
It's
because
sad.
they're all, yeah, they're driving a narrative to keep us asleep at the wheel and stay inside the so-called hamster wheel to never get out. And that's why they cause, and what that does, Kim, it creates this we become fragmented. So when we become fragmented, we're not whole, WHOLE, within ourselves, and that's what we talk about when we say you have to put your trust in God, because even in Christ's teachings, which I'm sure you're familiar with, this is that the kingdom of heaven is within. It's
Mhm.
within each of us. It's not up in the clouds somewhere, or the priest, or inside of a church. So that's what we have to start doing. I saw, a individual share a post to say, you have to trust the experts. They're the ones. You can't be thinking for yourself. So don't think that you know what you're doing with your own life. I mean, when you look at it from another perspective, you're going, "What are you talking about? That sounds completely insane. That's ludicrous." When did we lose this ability to think that we're not able to think for ourselves? We're not able to teach our own children. Oh, we don't, all of a sudden we have no idea how to raise our own kids. I mean, all of these things has been done on purpose.
You
So,
think it's on purpose?
oh,
Definitely,
absolutely.
definitely.
It's absolutely on purpose.
Who's doing it and why?
Oh.
Well, I told you we're in a spiritual war, and this is a
Yeah.
bit esoteric, but it talks about it in Genesis. You've read your Bible. It talks about it in Revelations. It talks about it, which is a really tough read, by the way. I just reread Revelations, and it's a tough read,
Mhm.
because it's a lot of analogies and symbolism. But yet,
Mm,
there's this other. We live. Let me back up. We live in according to science in a 5% world. Visible light is 5% of what exists in this entire universe. And you think you
Mhm.
know how things work. Well, none of us do, because we live in a 5% world. And so, consequently, if we make all of our assumptions, beliefs, assertions, perceptions from a 5%, we're missing a large part of what exists and what is. And so,
mm,
the institution, there are dark entities, call them demons, call them what you will, that
Mhm.
call them Nephilim, which are quoted in the Bible, that are in this world that have a vested interest in keeping you victimized, in keeping you in fear. And that's what happened during COVID. Fear, 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 fear.
Yeah.
There was no government edict. There was no constitutional law that said we had to shut into our homes, but we did it. Why? Because we were afraid that we were going to die, and we were propagated with fear time and time again. And if I may, you know, Anthony Fauci has been caught under oath lying numerous times. He
Yeah.
changed his story so many times he can't keep it straight. It's now been proven that masks don't work. It's now been proven that 6 feet apart doesn't work. So it is
Right.
on purpose. It's a control mechanism to keep
mm,
you stuck and to keep you victimized, because what these dark forces know is that if we remember who we are, then we'll take our power back and we're unstoppable. If God be
Mhm.
for us, who can be against us? We're unstoppable. There's way more of us than there are of them. And those are the individuals who are propagating the Green New Deal. And they've told us since the 70s we've got 10 years and we're going to be in an ice age. Well, I don't see any ice ages coming around, but they're still doing it. They just change the date, change the date, change the date. And so consequently, that's fearful for a lot of people. And
Mhm.
and there's so many examples of that.
Fear is definitely a powerful motivator to keep people controlled. Seems like everything is under the guise of fear, right? Even wars. Like, why do we wage wars? Because we fear the other, because we fear what they're going to do to us, or what we, maybe sometimes it's a legitimate fear. It's kind of the balance of how do we balance like a legitimate fear with a fear that's just used to get us to go along with something like COVID. And it's such a terrible, but the God part, I think the worshiping part is, I think the hardest for people, I don't know, maybe there's a shift that's happening right now, especially with like Russell Brand embracing God and being more religious, and Candace Owens joining the Catholic Church. And, maybe there's a shift, actually an active shift happening in society, where people are starting to seek more religion because they feel like something's really missing. But I think it's harder for people to understand that that is what's missing, that centering, that calming, or something to realize that you have a greater purpose or whatever. That's, I think, harder for people to grasp than the money and sex part, right? I think when you talk about money and sex and how we've now, our society has deteriorated because of the bastardization of these two tools that can be wonderful and also horrible depending on how you use them. Those, I think, are easier for people to latch onto and understand. Like, especially right now, the sex part, right? Like, we're seeing this all over the media with the Diddy stuff. I mean,
Right.
um, what a wild, whatever's gone on with that and that story. We now see we see that, we see Epstein and the young girls, and then there's other pedophilia stories that we hear about, or sex trafficking at the border, or pornography. I don't know if that's getting enough conversation, if there's enough chatter about porn, but
There's not.
Mhm.
that
There needs to be.
that has been majorly destructive for our society,
Yes,
hugely
we've
destructive.
been told by parents who have younger boys that they have no interest in having a relationship with a human female
Yeah,
because
Yeah.
and yet they're addicted to porn. And why is that? Because they're looking for the animalistic pleasure, and they can get it in a nanosecond, and there's no courting, and there's no conversation, and there's no courtship or any of those things. It's just an animalistic pleasure. Oh, okay, good. Let me shut down my browser. And so consequently, it needs to be talked more about. It's a huge industry. And I talk about that in God, Money, and Sex. A major portion of the American population plugs in to a porn site every single day, if not at least a couple times per week. And that's
yeah.
including married couples. And that's
Hmm.
just, we've gotten so far away from sacred principles. And let me go back to the religion. Bersabeh and I think I can speak for her, and Bersabeh, you can correct me, but we're not we're not committed to religion. We're really not. In fact, I'm working on a new book now, and I'm talking about all the institutions are corrupt.
Thank you so much for watching. This was just a clip from the longer, larger show that you can catch Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, at KimIversonShow.com. That'll route you to the platform where you need to be in order to get the full uncensored show every Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Click on that link, watch the full interview. See you there.